Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for all that have joined on live tonight. This is our fourth presentation with the program FarmOps, which I'll throw up a slide and we'll talk about that in a sec. And our third presentation about goats. So if you've been here the whole time, we welcome you back. If you have not been here before, welcome. Let's see. Sharing is not letting me share. I can just go ahead and share my screen and then share the presentation off the screen if that works. Okay. Technology is always fun. All right. So before we get started, I want to do a little tiny bit of housekeeping. So we are in a webinar format tonight, which means that you've all joined without sound and without video. So if you'd like to ask a question, and you can do so anytime during the presentation while either of us are talking, and we'll go ahead and answer that live, you can go ahead and put your question in the chat or the Q&A box. And those are found by toggling your mouse over the bottom part of your screen. You'll see a banner line up, and you can either click the one bubble for chat or two for Q&A. This presentation is being recorded so that we can share it with those of us who weren't able to attend live tonight. This presentation is a partnership between Cornell Cooperative Extension, Southwest New York Dairy, Livestock and Field Crops Program, which is a program that services a 5-county region in Southwest New York. But we were able to partner with Cornell Small Farms FarmOps program, and through that collaboration, we were able to bring you the presentation tonight and bring it both across the state and across state lines. So folks from New Jersey and New York are here tonight. So a big thank you to FarmOps. And we're really glad to have you as a partner for this effort. This is our standard disclaimer. You've probably seen it before, but essentially we are going to be talking about a lot of things in here related to healthcare and management of goats. And as such, while we do our best to provide scientific research-based information, this is not a substitute for not having a veterinarian. So we always recommend that if you have goats or any other livestock, please have a veterinarian on board. They can provide you with really specific recommendations to your farm, and having that relationship with the vet is invaluable. So we'll give you the baseline to start off with, and then you'll work with your veterinarian to get even more specific for your operation. So tonight, both Katelyn and I will be presenting. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself first since I'm already talking. My name is Amy Barkley, and I'm the Livestock and Beginning Farm Specialist with the Southwest New York Dairy, Livestock and Field Crops Program. My role essentially encompasses all production and management things related to livestock and poultry. And so that includes pasture management, health and production management, meat marketing, and meat quality assurance, essentially, and egg quality assurance, because we do have eggs too. So with that, Katelyn, I will let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Katelyn Walley-Stoll, and I work with Amy on the Southwest New York team. I cover farm business management as well as I'm team leader for our program. So I kind of work with the people, paperwork, and profit side of farming. People don't like me very much, but that's okay. But additionally, I also grew up on a dairy farm, but then my husband and I started our own diversified livestock operation where we raise, oh, sorry, I just got my, there we go, where we raise beef cows, goats, and other various livestock. So come at this with a little bit of on the ground experience as well. And really grateful that all of you are here tonight. Also, just one kind of other housekeeping thing, Amy and I are sharing a space. So we're hoping that there's not an echo and that our audio is still getting picked up. So if at any point things just don't sound right, just if somebody could be willing to let us know in the chat, we can adjust as needed. So good so far. All right. Turn it over to you.
Perfect. All right. So I will kick off the presentation of Baby Mama Drama. I can't take credit for the name. Katelyn shared the name with me. Apparently it was shared by another educator in the county office here in Chautauqua County. It's just a wonderful name. So we just ran with it. But it's essentially our definition of goat reproduction and kidding, which is a really exciting time in itself. So for tonight, we're going to talk about the reproductive cycle of goats and why we care. Believe it or not, there's a little bit of nuance to this. We can't just go ahead and breed animals whenever we want. We need to kind of follow the goat's natural rhythm and pattern. Then we'll go into selecting animals and breeding ratios. And then we'll be video heavy in our second portion of the lecture, which Katelyn will lead. This will go through the kitting process and preparing your kitting kit, which is a really important part of being ready to help out mama and help out babies as soon as they're born. So we're going to get started with a poll. And so I'm going to go ahead and launch this. This is our first poll. And if you would please answer about your experience with goat breeding and kitting. So your options are, I've been thinking about breeding goats. I have animals that I intend to breed, but I'm really not sure, how or if I want to start. I have goats, but I don't want to breed them, and I don't have goats yet. So we'll leave that up for a little while here. Well, a few more seconds or so. Okay. So it looks like we have a good majority of folks in. I'm going to go ahead and share those results. So it looks like a lot of us are either we don't have goats yet, or we're not sure if we want to breed them. And then the other half of us is we have animals that we intend to breed, but we're not sure where to start. So this is really good. We're hoping that we'll answer some of your questions here as we go along. Okay, so why do we care about goat reproductive cycles? Well, first, we've got to answer the question of why we're breeding our goats in the first place. Breeding goats is not an insignificant undertaking. It takes a lot of planning and management of both calendar schedules and the animals themselves. But if we have certain goals in mind, breeding goats might be for us. So the first is to increase herd numbers with keeping a closed herd on the farm. So many of us will buy goats in from somewhere else to get started, but we may want to keep disease and parasites out of our herd or reduced in our herd. And by keeping our herd closed, so only breeding individuals from our herd to replace those that leave, we can help increase our herd numbers and keep our herd bios secure. The second is preparing does for milk production. If we have goats that we intend to milk, they have to have a baby. And so either we take that animal out to get bred, or we bring in a buck to breed that animal. But if we want milk, we need doelings and bucklings. Next is producing meat animals. So sometimes we have characteristics that we want to select for in terms of meat production. Maybe it's better hooves, because some of our meat breeds are notorious for bad hooves, even though they have wonderful body conformations and muscle accumulation. Maybe we want animals that have a little bit more of a ribeye muscle in the back of their loin, which can bring higher money if you're selling by the cut. So the production of meat animals in a way that you'd like to, and the selection of animals in general, choosing which animals you want to breed to improve genetic X in your herd, all of these are valid reasons to breed your own. When we talk about the general reproductive cycle of goats, it works like this. The doe has hormones and they circulate in her body at all times. And at certain times of the year, those hormones do shift. And during that shift, she'll go into heat. So typically that heat cycle lasts about 12 to 36 hours after standing heat. And what standing heat is when the animal is receptive to mounting by a buck. Sometimes another doe in the herd might mount the doe in standing heat, or the buck might attempt to mount a doe in standing heat. But that heat cycle will last for 12 to 36 hours after you start detecting that. The cycle will average about 21 days. So kind of like people, so about 3 weeks or so. Average range is about 18 to 22 days. So during the breeding season, every 18 to 22 days, you can expect the doe to go through heat where she'll be receptive and maybe bred. Once bred, the pregnancy of goats is about 150 days, give or take about 10 days. So once they're bred, you can look out for that. Generally, when you're breeding with cattle, we have the option between artificial insemination and live cover, which means breeding with a bull. In goat farming, we don't really have a lot of artificial insemination yet. We're working on it. We have information about it, but it's not super common practice. So most folks that want to breed will breed with a buck, whether they keep that buck on premise or they rent a buck. So you can go ahead and rent a buck and bring it in, or you bring your does to somebody else's buck for breeding. But generally, when the does and the bucks come together, we'll put them together for about 40 to 45 days. that allows them to go through 2 heat cycles. So 2 of that average of 21 days, because usually on the first heat cycle, it's not really noticeable. And especially if you're trying to breed out of season, the doe may not be receptive, or maybe she isn't ovulating, or maybe it doesn't take. So by keeping them in for 2 heat cycles, we're able to enhance our chances of successfully mating. And to that end, goats aren't year-round breeders. So I alluded to this a little bit earlier. They're what's called seasonally polyestrous, which essentially means they will come into heat regularly in the fall time with the decreasing light patterns. That's just how they're built. Now, some of them might come into estrus, on either end of that, usually more towards summer. But most of the time, there is a certain time of year where it's very, very difficult to breed them without additional hormones and injections and that sort of thing. So if you want to go ahead and breed naturally, fall is going to be the easiest time for those does to take, so to accept and start a viable pregnancy. But goats are also fun in that they're spontaneously ovulating as well, which means if you take a buck and you put it in with a doe, even if it's slightly out of season, that buck's hormones, so smells that are embedded within its hair, sometimes smells within its urine, that will trick the doe's body into coming into estrus. So she'll go ahead and start cycling, producing a viable egg for fertilization out of season. So when we think about breeding out of season, it's going to depend on the climate and also on the breed of goat. So depending on what breed you have, they might be able to be bred all year round without a lot of difficulty, but others might be really stuck in that fall season. So just check out which breed you have and what their hormone cycles look like. So with that little introduction, we're going to have a second poll question. And that poll question is, why do you want to breed your goats? So the answers can be to save money, have breed specific genetics in my herd, want to produce milk, want to be more self-sufficient, or maybe we don't know yet. So let this go a little bit. Okay, yeah, it's multiple choice, so you can click multiple answers. Okay, great. So it looks like it's kind of all across the board. We want to be more self-sufficient, produce milk, introduce specific genetics, and save money. So I think we can accomplish that all through breeding our own animals. So then there's a follow-up survey to this specific slide. Oops, which I'll go ahead and launch now. So now that we've talked about breeding times, my question to you is, with that general introduction, I know it's a very short introduction, which season sounds the best for you to breed your goats? So in spring, summer, fall, or winter? And it's multiple choice. So if you're thinking about breeding your goats in multiple seasons, you can go ahead and select. As we go along, I'll just share some of the reasons why we do what we do here. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So in spring, you can go ahead and breed them in spring. It's hard to get does pregnant, but they will have kids in the fall if you breed them in spring. And so maybe that's a management strategy that works well for you. If you have them in summer, especially late summer, this time of year you can breed goats, then you will have a larger bodied goat kid that's ready for Easter sales or early spring sales. In the fall, you work with the natural cycle. It's just, the standard. And then winter, you can try to breed them. It might be a little difficult to breed them. But sometimes you might want to do this if you don't want to have goats until it's really warm and nice out on pasture, so that we have less of a chance of cold shock to the babies, and so that there's food readily available for the does once they give birth. So, great. Thanks so much for sharing. Okay, we're going to discuss breeding ratios now. So when we think about breeding ratios, it's usually about 20 to 30 does per buck. So he can get a lot of work done in a very short period of time. So in that 2-month, 45-day time period. That said, buck age influences his breeding capacity. So the younger he is, the fewer does he can breed, but as he gains experience, it gains libido and gains size and all of that fun stuff, he can breed more does. So a buck that's 3 years old can breed about twice that of a 1-year-old buck. When we think about signs of heat, and you don't have to see heat to put bucks and does together, because remember, they're spontaneously ovulating. So, if you want to bring them together, but if you want to have an idea of maybe when that goat was bred, and you don't have a marking harness, which we'll talk about in a sec, you can identify signs of heat through these factors. So does will increase their vocalization. You'll see some clear vaginal discharge. They might increase urination frequency. This is in response to those hormones. They can't help it. So these things you will definitely see. They could be pacing the fence line. So if they see a buck and they're interested, they want to go to that buck. So they'll pace, and he'll probably pace too, especially if he's downwind and smells that they're in heat. And as I shared earlier, sometimes, that first heat cycle won't be really intense and might not take. And sometimes you'll see very few signs, but you might see few signs and your does might be bred. So there are different tests that we can conduct to check for pregnancy hormones that indicate whether or not your pregnancy took, and that, as well as ultrasound strategies by your veterinarian, can help identify who's bred and who's not.
Amy?
Yeah.
Couple questions. I think you have to mute while I talk.
Oh,
so we don't,
yep.
There we go. We'll figure this out. Couple questions that have come up in the chat. One I addressed, Heidi commented, OMG, we only have 2 does for our 1 buck. He gets very rowdy. So I just commented in there that, definitely less does per buck is okay. And it actually does increase your conception rate. So if a buck's trying to service less does overall, then, he's going to spend more time with them. So more likely that doe will get pregnant, and perfectly okay to do that. We also had a question from Jason asking about the STAR system. I commented that it's a breeding system that could be a 2-hour topic on its own, typically used in commercial systems. But if you want to give a 30-second overview of what it is, and then that way Jason can know if it's something he wants to learn more about.
Yeah, so with the pregnancy time period of a goat being about 150 days, we can get about 2 breedings a year out of goats if we push them to breed out of season. And so what STAR is it's essentially a schedule of hormone placements either in the vagina or injections that cause that doe to come into heat when we want her to come into heat, even if it's out of season, so that we can go ahead and breed her and have the largest number of kids per year out of her that we can. So it's called STAR because there's a pattern that forms a star, if that makes sense. But yeah, there's a lot of literature out there on it. So if it's something that you want to know, let us know and we can shoot you over that literature.
Okay, I think that was everything. And I did drop the link into the STAR system. Actually, I've got it up here really quick. We can just show you what it looks like and why we didn't spend time talking about it tonight. There we go. So this is a, let me pull up the right thing here. This is a Cornell research-based system that was designed actually at Cornell with their herds that they have on the farm. But essentially, it's a STAR system because, like Amy was saying, of the points that you're weaning and breeding. It's really hard to do this without hormone interventions, however, though, because you are breeding out of season. So typically this is done on larger commercial systems where you're working really closely with a veterinarian to time those hormone shots, and where you're really depending on accelerated production for profitability. So for small scale flocks and homestead or small farm situations, really difficult to get a STAR management system to work. But as you get into mid-sized flocks and larger flocks, and you're looking to increase your production, definitely an option. So this link is in the comments, and you can see, look into it more if you're interested in what that entails.
Awesome. Thanks for the overview. All right. That's why we didn't get involved, because it's a very involved system. Okay. So let's talk about body condition real quick. So if you were in our goat videos, back when we first started talking about buying a goat, we were talking about looking at body condition. Well, body condition not only indicates the health of the animal, but also the fitness of that animal to carry a pregnancy. So, and to breed. So generally goats are scaled 1 to 5 in terms of their body condition. So if we look at this image here on the right-hand side, a 1 is a very skinny goat, basically just skin and bones. She doesn't have extra metabolic capacity to produce a viable egg and to breed. She might breed, but she'll probably lose the pregnancy. A 2 is an animal that's a little more heavy, but she's not big by any means. She'll probably need to be fed up in order to hit that target body weight before she's bred. Again, if she's bred, she might not come into heat. If she does, she might not hold a viable pregnancy. A body condition score of 3 is kind of where we want to target. That animal has enough fat and muscle and metabolism and is producing healthy eggs. So she'll go ahead and carry kids for you. And those on the 4 and 5 range, believe it or not, sometimes they don't breed because they're overweight. The hormones get kind of messed up with the obesity, with the fat factors. And it also increases the chance that you'll run into something called dystocia when they're ready to kid. And dystocia is essentially a difficult birth. Another lecture all on its own, but it's really important that we keep our goats in good body condition in order to breed them. Another thing to think about is by keeping them in that ideal body condition, we also reduce the risk of them encountering metabolic disease, either in late pregnancy or during early lactation, which are times when the body's demand for different nutrients is really, really high. And so if they're not readily available, which they aren't as available in some of these animals on the outside of the spectrum, we can run into problems. So another reason to keep your goats at a healthy weight. Okay, so maintaining a viable pregnancy from a 30,000 foot view looks like providing a good plane of nutrition. So providing a source of protein and energy, usually that's through forage, that can be through pasture, or that can be through hay, or sometimes baleage if you have enough goats to feed out baleage in a timely manner. And if you have skinnier animals before breeding, you can actually provide them extra protein and energy if you have a higher a ration that's more nutrient dense in order for them to kind of gain that body condition to go ahead and breed and to keep that pregnancy. If you have a fat goat going in, you really can't do a lot about it. She's just going to stay fat the whole pregnancy because we don't want her to lose weight over the pregnancy. That's probably more detrimental than for her to keep that current body condition that she has. For all goats, we want to make sure that we're providing a quality goat mineral to them that can be either in a loose powderish, like granular form, or in a block, and making sure that we have enough blocks that the whole herd can access so that those bully does don't kick subordinate does out of the way, just to make sure that everybody gets the dose of minerals they need. All right. So we're going to go into a couple of videos here, and then we'll end with a poll. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to talk about considerations for identifying does that we want to breed.
Hi everyone, welcome. We are going to look at a few
different
female goats.
Okay, they can hear something. It's just a me problem. That's okay.
Okay.
All right.
It might be your speakers on your Zoom too.
It could be, yeah.
Okay. Well, we will go ahead and start this.
All right.
Hi everyone, welcome. We are going to look at a few different female goats here that are in different stages of their lives to kind of give you a general overview, which kicks off our whole talk today about breeding and reproduction. So when we look at these goats, there are 3 goats of varying ages and varying relations. And the first one I'd like to start with is this large one in front who is currently getting a snack. She is the oldest of the 3. She's the mother goat currently of this young one here. She gave birth in March, and at this point, that baby is about 4 months old and getting ready to wean. At weaning time, we can then get the doe's body ready for breeding again, and she'll be put in with the buck soon to get rebred to have another baby a little later on. This little kid over here is actually not so much a kid anymore. She's about a year old. So she's coming into, well, she was sexually mature around 4 months of age, but her body wasn't ready for breeding. So she was kept a little while longer to get her body to the size and maturity it needed to be in order to successfully breed and have a viable pregnancy. So she's coming up on a year old, and she'll be ready to breed shortly. When we think about the ages of these animals, age matters. With these two kids, one's more of a kid than the other, the one's a little more mature, we want to be sure that we know our ages when we breed them. So this young doeling, she's female goat, she is about 3-4 months old or so. Her body is actually at the point where she could maybe hold a pregnancy and get bred, but she would still be growing at that point if she was bred, and her baby would suffer and she would also suffer. She might not grow to her fullest potential and produce a baby that might be a little less thrifty than it would be if we let her mature to the same size and physiological age as her half-sister right here, who is now a year old and old enough now to hold a viable pregnancy. So this one right here with the darker face will be put in with the buck shortly, as well as the mother of the younger one to be rebred, and she will be let grow out another 8 months or so in order to get her to that mature size so that she can hold and maintain a viable pregnancy.
All right, so we actually, let me just see if there were any questions on that video. Okay, nope, just the comments that we could hear sound. So we're gonna play a second video for you. And so we're gonna look at a buck. When you're selecting a buck for breeding, there are a couple of things to look out for. So we'll share those with you in this video.
We have a billy goat. He would be a breeding buck. This is what we would be using to sire our goat herd. Couple of things to look out for with bucks. First of all, they're super smelly. So bucks will spray pheromones and they smell terrible. Their urine is super concentrated. So very similar if you've ever had like a tomcat spraying. It's a similar thing. So just keep that in mind. You can smell a buck from a mile away. Most bucks retain their horns, so they're not getting dehorned. They can be really dangerous around little kids, and if you're working with them, just keep that in mind. This buck, knock on wood, is very docile, but even when I'm trimming feet and things like that, these can catch you in the wrong spot and it hurts really bad. This is a boar, so these are the ones that we talked about that are made for meat consumption. They struggle a lot with hoof problems, so you'll see he's kind of lipping on one of his upper front feet. He's just getting over some hoof rot that we're taking care of and working with our vet to treat that. But other than that, he would be considered a healthy boar. So he's got an appropriate amount of body condition. He has a little bit of a skin thing going on just with the temperature changes over time. Again, you'll see that front leg is a little bit swollen and he's limping on it, but he's standing on the rest of his legs as he should be. Eyes don't look dull or droopy or have any discharge coming out. Nose doesn't have any discharge coming out. If we look at hair coat, it's generally shiny except for where he's shedding. And general anatomy of a male goat, what we're looking for, you can see his penis at the very bottom under his belly. And then we're going to double check his testicles. So the biggest thing is just making sure that there are in fact 2 testicles that have descended. You can see that he has 1, 2, and they look healthy. So sometimes they can get like rot and sore in between where they're rubbing along their upper legs, and he doesn't have that. So with the exception of his upper front leg, we would expect him to breed the females that he's with, especially being the spring, summer season. And even with goats, especially boar goats and other goats that struggle with hoof problems, even if they have hoof problems, as long as you are treating them, working with your vet to maintain them, they will still continue to breed your does accordingly.
And then one of the things I want to follow up on.
We're going to show you what a goat looks.
You're good. Is that we were talking about how the front legs don't really matter so much during a breeding soundness exam, which is essentially looking over that boar to make sure, or that buck to make sure that he's good to go, because they're going to stand on their hind feet to breed. So, as long as they have those back feet really sound and steady for a launching off point to maintain their weight when they're mounting the doe, they should be absolutely fine to breed. So we do have a question that I saw come through in the chat. So will goats on diverse pasture and forage edge select their own good nutrition mix, or does it need special monitoring? So the answer is they'll generally select, what they like, and that may or may not have the nutrition plane that they need. So especially in soils like ours, we are selenium deficient. So that's definitely something that will need to be supplemented through the mineral mix, especially if you're working with a feed distributor to get a mineral mix specific for the Northeast. And there you might have some deficiencies in other nutrients as well. So you can test your forage and see, but we always recommend providing a loose mineral or a block mineral, especially if you're doing reproduction, because there's a lot of really wonky things that can happen if that goat is not consuming the exact proportions of forages that she needs to make that a healthy kid. So in terms of monitoring, you can do that. It's time consuming and it's not really necessary. The mineral is cheap enough that it'll more than pay for your time to monitor. So good question. Okay. And so with that, I think I have one more poll question. Let me see here. Nope. Looks like I asked that a little earlier. So we're good to go then with my section. Thanks for hanging in there. Any questions, again, can go in the chat. We'll go ahead and answer those. And I'm looking over at Katelyn because she's right here because we are sharing an office space. Do you want to take a quick 5-minute break or do you want to just transition right into your section?
I think let's keep going.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and keep going. We have another question in the chat box. I leave a billion with the does. Is that good? So I'll it's kind of like one of those, it depends on what you want situations. I'll start and I'll say, if you don't care when you have kids born, then it's okay. I don't think the doe would get overbred, but there is a chance that you could have babies when you don't want to have babies. Katelyn, did you have anything to add to that?
I would just say also it can sometimes be an animal like physical health concern depending on how aggressive that buck is. So for example, like if you have a doe that is already bred, but she's with the buck and that buck is really aggressive towards her, she could potentially lose the pregnancy because that's a really stressful situation. So depending on the personality of the buck, for example, you might want to pull the doe, but that just depends on each pairing. In general, keeping the buck with the doe while she's pregnant won't affect her as long as he's got a good personality. Now, when she kids though, sometimes bucks can be very aggressive towards kids. So you definitely want to make sure that you're separating them, especially if it's the sire. So, sometimes goats can become sexually viable earlier than that 4-month thing. So they might start cycling as early as 3 months, for example. So if you've got that buck in there, then he could potentially breed, and you could have some inbreeding incidences there. So, personally, this buck that was actually in the video, he's hanging out with an old doe that I have that's pregnant and they're doing just fine. But it is one of those things that you keep an eye on.
Great, thanks for that insight, appreciate it. Okay, so we have another question that popped up in the chat. So the question is if the feed has enough selenium in it, should you still provide a mineral block? And the answer is yes, because even though you might have enough selenium in your feed, especially if it's pelleted feed, it's not guaranteed that those goats are going to eat enough of that feed to maintain their mineral balance. So by providing that mineral, it's cheap insurance. Yeah, they shouldn't overconsume it either because there's usually enough salt in there to limit their intake. Okay, and with that, we can transition into your section, Katelyn.
Okay, so my apologies for the delay. I've got a few different screens here and they're not behaving. So we're gonna get there real quick. All right, I think that this should work. So let me go ahead and share. Okay, so at this point you should be seeing a slide about kidding. And here. So for the second half of this presentation, we're really going to focus on kidding. with a lot of videos about supplies that you might want to have on hand and how to use them. So this is a really video forward section. All of these videos you will have access to watch on your own, and they're chunked out in little pieces. So if there's one that you want to go back to and learn more about it, you can do that as well. But then please keep the questions coming as we go along, and we'll address them moving forward. So when we think about kidding, which is the act of a goat giving birth, I'm also a dairy kid, so sometimes I call it freshening, which is what we call a cow giving birth. But kidding is the act of a goat giving birth to a kid. So there's generally 3 stages of labor that we consider very similar to human labor stages. The first stage is kind of this preparation stage. So this could be 4 to 12 hours before active labor starts. In this time, you'll notice that the doe, the mom, is getting really anxious. So she might be standing up, sitting down, very restless, moving around, just looks very uncomfortable. While that's all happening, that kid is getting ready to get into position for delivery. And depending on the animal, more mature does, this pre-stage will only last a couple of hours. If it's a doe's first time kidding, it could last up to a day sometimes, and they just look so darn miserable. So the second stage of kidding is the actual delivery of the kid. You'll see a water sac come out of the vagina, it will rupture, then you'll hopefully see 2 feet appear, and then a head appear, and then a kid is born. And it's a glorious day. Depending on the doe, this can last between 1 and 4 hours. If it's the doe's first time giving birth, it'll be a little bit longer. Mature does, it can happen in 5 minutes time. You see water set, kids are born, everybody's happy. And then the third stage of labor is the placenta being delivered. So in this photo that's pictured here, it's a little bit dark, but you can, and we'll take a look at it. You can actually see, this mom is looking off her kid, and she just delivered the placenta as well. This stage usually lasts between 1 and 8 hours. And if after 8 hours that placenta still hasn't been delivered, they can have a condition called retained placenta, which can make them really ill really quick. So we definitely would recommend working with your veterinarian in that situation. And we'll take a look at, this is a shorter home video of a birth that we had a few months ago on the farm, just showing it so you can see the placenta.
Born at 7:20. Pulled her out. Other 2 were okay.
So what I do on my farm is I take a video because I'm really bad at record keeping sometimes, and will just voice out, these are the kids that were born. So you can see that she's got one kid over here that she just had that's just starting to get up and walking around. And then this is the latest kid. She's working on cleaning it off. And here's the placenta that she delivered. So she's gone through all 3 stages of labor at that point. So just some general best tips when managing kidding on your farm. The first one is to not be afraid. It can be really scary sometimes. It brings a lot of anxiety, but at the end of the day, these animals they're meant to do this. And sometimes we intervene too soon and can actually make things worse. So just taking a deep breath and recognizing that nature does its thing, regardless of whether or not we're there. My other tip is to definitely work with a veterinarian and have a vet that you trust. So if you do get into a situation where you need help right away, they can come and respond. And if you don't have a vet that can respond in emergency calls like that, have a farmer friend that's nearby that can come and help you if you run into any issues or just need somebody else to talk to. The other thing that I recommend is, trying to monitor goats during kidding season can be really intense. And I have some people that use video monitors, and it just gives you that level of peace of mind. So you're not sitting out in the barn for 5 days straight. We actually started using some old baby cameras that have worked really well. And then about 1 month out, goats will actually start showing signs of impending delivery, impending labor. So what we have right here is a video of an older doe that is about 1 month, 2 to 3 weeks out from kidding. We didn't quite time it to to get her to kid. No, it's not going to come up. There we go. So we will run through this video. It's about 3 minutes long.
Now we're going to show you what a goat looks like as she gets closer to kidding. We didn't time this course just right to get somebody that was kidding today, but we're estimating based on when we put this doe in with the buck that she's only 2 or 3 weeks off, and she's definitely showing some signs of being ready to kid soon. So the first thing that I want to note is that this doe is a little bit older. This will be her 7th batch of kids that she's having. So you can kind of tell her coat is just a little bit duller than what a younger, healthy animal would be. Doesn't mean that she's unhealthy, it's just that she's old and we love her. She's a little bit bonier along her top line. Again, just a little bit of an older goat. And then her udder, which we'll look at in a little bit, is a little bit saggier than what a younger goat would be, but again, we still love her. So what we're going to look for when a goat is getting ready to kid, we're going to check her respiration rate. Respiration rate will increase. You'll see her kind of, so that's just her body overheating, getting ready to go into the kidding labor stage. Actually, you can see the you can see the kids kicking a little bit. So, and her shivering because she's scared. So, other things that we're going to check for is if she's getting sick. So sometimes when goats are getting ready to kid, their immune systems are just naturally lower. They can sometimes come up with some respiratory issues, so we would just check for any nasal discharge, eye discharge, and she is doing okay there. So then once we've kind of done that, just what does she look like overall? We're going to move to her back half, and that's where all of the action is happening. If you look from a rear view, you can see how extended her poor belly is. This doe in particular usually has about 3 kids each time that she freshens. So there's a lot going on in there. So she's definitely extended in her abdomen. The next thing that we're going to look at is her udder. So as goats get closer to kidding, this udder fills up with milk and it gets almost like a swollen feeling, but definitely a very, very full feeling. She doesn't want you to look at her udder. So you can see how prominent it is, and she's not nursing kids right now. So if she's not nursing kids, and you can notice her udder, as she goes along, gets closer to kidding, it'll get fuller and fuller. What we really look for is her T ends. So her T ends haven't gotten full of milk yet, which means she's still a little bit far off. A couple days before she freshens, these T ends will actually swell up with milk, and they almost look like a cone shape. The next thing that we're going to look at is her vulva. So as animals get closer to kidding, their vulva gets swollen and often has a lot of discharge. This looks like a normal vulva, but she does have a little bit of discharge coming. You can see it kind of looks like slime glistening. So that means, again, like she's getting close, but still has a little bit more to go. This will actually almost double in size, so it really does get quite a bit more swollen right before they're ready to kid. So I would expect in a couple weeks we will see some babies.
Okay, so with that, those are kind of our best tips. Now we're going to move into some more details about what to have on hand when it comes time for kidding. So the first thing that I do want to say that I warned you about is you will probably end up with a goat in your house at some point. So goats are just one of those lovable creatures. And I have to tell a very quick story about this little guy here. He was born right around Christmas time, so we actually named him Blitzen. And then there's the goat. Just kidding. This is my son, Renly. This is the goat Blitzen. We had a visitor come to our house, and we have a bunch of dogs in our house. So she's going along petting dog number 1, pets dog number 2, pets dog number 3, and then leans down to pet what she thought was dog number 4, and it didn't feel quite right. So she jumped up a little bit, looked down, and she's like, "What? This is a goat with a diaper." And we're like, "Oh, you know, it's fine. Everything's fine." So you will end up with a goat in your house at some point, and it's okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about extensively is preparing your kidding kit. The reason that we're doing it this way is we're going to go through some different things that you should have on hand when you are thinking about kidding. But beyond that, we're actually going to go through each item and talk about why it's important to have on hand and how you might use it. And again, you'll have access to all of these videos. So a kidding kit is a bucket a plastic tub, an area on your farm or homestead where you're keeping supplies on hand that are specifically designed for kitting emergencies. And the hope is you have these supplies and you don't ever need to use them. I promise you, if you don't have these supplies, you will absolutely need them every single time a goat is kitting. We recommend working with your veterinarian, neighbor farmers, and any types of mentors that you have to determine what you specifically need for your farm. We're going to go through some examples here. These are kind of the more common things to have on hand. There's definitely people that prefer one thing or the other, or have additional items that they like to include. And we're going to, the cool part about these seminars that we've been doing is they're definitely a mix between research-based information and some of Amy and I's own experiences. So some of the things that we're going to show you here, these are things that I've decided to include in my kitting kit based on small horror stories for why I'm keeping those there. So we're going to watch 4 videos in this section. The first one's going to be talking about actually going through and making a kitting kit. We'll talk about record keeping, other types of supplies to have on hand, and cleaning and sanitation.
So now we're going to show you what you might want to consider keeping in your kitting kit. It's definitely subjective. We would absolutely recommend that you talk to other goat producers to see what types of products they rely on, as well as talking to your vet. So your veterinarian is going to have an idea about what medications you should have on hand and when you should be calling them. So the first thing, jokingly but not jokingly, that you're going to need is a folding chair. So the thing with goats going in labor is that it takes forever, and then you're going to turn around for a second to go grab a drink of water, come back, and she's going to be kitting, and it's doing its thing. And then the kids are immensely cute, so you're going to want to sit and watch them for 2 hours. So I absolutely, positively recommend having a folding chair around. Along the same lines of a folding chair is a tarp. So tarps can come in handy, and these are just cheap, small tarps that I can throw away if they get nasty and I don't feel bad about it. But they're really helpful. So for you, if you need a place to stand or sit because you didn't listen to me and bring your folding chair, you can put this down on the barn floor and hang out while you're watching while you're waiting for the doe to kid. The other thing that you can do is if you get in a situation where maybe the goat pen is a little bit dirty, or if you're having to pull the kids out and you don't want to, drop them on the dirty area, you can put the tarp down. It's just like a clean area to do whatever you need to do with the kid. And then finally, once the kid is born, usually, depending on what type of an area you have where that doe is kidding, it can get really gross and slimy and wet. So having a tarp to lay down, or just something that you can put down if you need to, can be really helpful. One of the more important things that you can include in your kitting kit that is often forgotten is a notebook and a pen. So it's really important to write down, for example, what time you see her water break, what time you see kid hooves appear, what time you are noticing that she might be going into labor. And it's really important to know the timing of these things so that you know when you have to intervene. So I just keep a small notebook and a pen in my kitting kit, and I know it's there if I need it. So a couple of miscellaneous things that I like to try to have on hand are a flashlight, a flashlight that has batteries that works, and a headlamp. So a headlamp might seem silly, but sometimes when you've got one hand in a goat, one hand trying to pull a kid out, having a light to see what you're doing can be really helpful. So don't be afraid of what you look like you're trying to save a life. Get a headlamp. Some other things that you might want to have on hand are thermometers. So these can be used to monitor the temperature of your goat. If you've never taken a temperature of a goat before, you do so rectally. So what's suggested that you do is you get a thermometer that you can use rectally. You'll put a little bit of lubricant on the edge of that thermometer, pick up the goat's tail, and insert just the tip of the thermometer into the rectum and turn the thermometer on. Wait until you get a temperature reading. You might need to monitor the temperature of the doe to check to make sure that she doesn't have a fever, which could indicate some type of infection. And you might also need to monitor the temperature of the kid to make sure that the kid's temperature isn't too low. This is an old style mercury thermometer. When you're using a mercury thermometer, the biggest thing is to make sure that it doesn't break while you're using it on the animal. and wait until the temperature stops escalating. You don't get that helpful beep that says you've arrived at the correct temperature. So either of those can be useful tools to have on hand. Birth can be a really dirty business, and we want to make sure we're keeping as much bacteria out as we can. So I'm a big proponent of cleaning and sanitizing everything whenever I feel like I need to intervene into a kid's birth. So what I've got here is a stainless steel bucket. This is a seamless bucket, so there's no bacteria hiding in any cracks and crevices. A towel that I can use to dry and clean, and then different cleaning solutions that are good to keep on hand. So one is regular dish soap. This is useful for cleaning off any of your equipment. For example, if you have to use OB chains, if you have to use a bucket or a bottle to feed a kid, it can be helpful for cleaning. Scrub brush for scrubbing off whatever you need to scrub. The other thing too is that if a mom has had a really difficult birth, she can be covered in blood and amniotic fluid, so I might run a little bit of dish soap and a little bit of hot water with a scrub brush to help clean her off. Then I've got just some regular bleach that can be used following label directions for disinfection, as well as rubbing alcohol for disinfection.
Okay, so that's kind of the introduction to kitting kits as well as some general supplies. I would say that all of those supplies are must-haves. So some of the things that we're going to get into might end up on the optional side for you and your farm. So now we're going to learn a little bit about supplies to have on hand for keeping kids warm. The reason for this is that depending on our breeding cycle, sometimes kids are being born into temperatures that are less than 40 degrees. In general, if temperatures are over 40 degrees, for the most part, healthy kids as they're born can keep up with that. If it's below 40 degrees, we get a little bit worried. And absolutely, if it's below 0 degrees, you're almost always going to have to intervene. Goats are born with relatively little body fat, so it's really hard for them to keep their own temperatures. In the way their body system and their heat dispersion is, they lose body heat extremely quickly. And with goats in particular, once they lose that body heat and their temperature gets low, it is extremely hard to bring that body temperature back up to where it needs to be, and they can actually die really quickly. So for example, if you are fall breeding and your kids are born in the winter, they will always kid on a day that it's -10. So you could have 3 30-degree days, and that day that the temperature drops, that's when those babies are born. And in that situation, if you're not out there intervening, the chances that that kid could die increase greatly. Normal goat body temperature is 102 to 104 degrees. So as you can guess, it's really easy for them to drop low when temperatures are really low as well outside. So again, using that thermometer, keeping that thermometer on hand can be really helpful. We're going to watch this video and then we'll come back to a couple other things about this. I don't know why it's doing that.
So the next thing to consider, and it really is weather dependent, but goats are really susceptible to getting too cold, too quick, and they will have a very hard time coming back. So we want to keep several things in our kitting kit to help get those animals clean, dry, and warm right away. Best case scenario, the doe is kitting in perfectly warm and beautiful weather, and she takes care of cleaning that kid on her own, and you don't have to worry about it. Worst case scenario, it's -10 degrees outside, that doe wants nothing to do with cleaning off the kid, and you're all on your own. So it's important to have things that you can turn to. First thing that I like to bring along are just some old bath towels. You don't want to pick anything that you are going to miss if you throw it away. The advantage of having bath towels is that you can get that animal dry quickly. It does help warm them up. The act of rubbing them to dry them stimulates their bodies just the same way as if the mom was licking them off. Getting all of the amniotic fluid off of their bodies, the mucus off of their bodies, helps keep them dry, which will help keep them warm. After you dry them off, if they're still cold, depending on the weather, if they're shivering, if they're lethargic, we're then going to turn to some other things to keep them warm. So the next thing that I recommend keeping in your kidding kit is a hair dryer. So we don't want to put it on high on full blast right on the kid, but it can help kind of remove what's left of that amniotic fluid to keep that goat dry and help warm the goat up. So I usually put it on like medium and hold it quite a bit away from the goat. Move it back and forth. Don't leave it in one spot for too long, and it will help to warm that kid up. The next thing that I keep on hand, or you should keep on hand to help keep your goat warm, is a heat lamp. Problem with heat lamps is that if they fall down, if they're not protected, if you're not installing them correctly, they can cause barn fires, so I tend to use them sparingly. But when I do use a heat lamp, I make sure I get one that has some type of a wire cage protection on it. I'm going to keep it low enough so that it is heating up the area that I want the kid to be in, but it's high enough that the mom isn't going to accidentally knock it over when she's walking around. So typically what this looks like would be you would put a heat lamp in the corner of a pen, put it up just high enough so that it still is getting that goat warm, but the mom can't get to it. And then that goat kid has a safe corner to go to. And then paper towels. So sometimes if your towel just isn't cutting it, or if you've got some really mucus or blood that you're trying to clean away, paper towels are great because you can wipe that up, throw it away. Also are handy for keeping yourself cleaned up too. And then the other kind of trick that I would give you if you have a kid that is just born cold, won't come around, we do hot water baths. So this can either be in the plastic tub, or your own bathroom tub. Basically what you run is you run some warm water, not hot to the touch, but body temperature water for you, and you're going to submerge the goat in that. Submerge her in there until the water starts to cool off. Get her out, dry her off, blow her off with a hair dryer, see if that works. Using warm water that you're completely submerging that kid in will help bring her body temperature up faster than these other things are, but it also takes a long time, gets the kid away from the mom. It essentially washes off all of the amniotic fluid and the pheromones that are on the kid that is going to make the mom want to respond and care for that kid. So it's kind of a last resort.
Okay, so I do want to add one caveat. I said to submerge the animal in water, you need to keep their head above water. I was having my husband kind of preview these videos, and he said, Caitlin, you didn't say anything about not drowning the goat. So don't drown your goat. And if I didn't say that, then someone would absolutely sue me. So this method of using a hot water bath to warm up any type of an animal, and I should have started too with the fact that a lot of these tips and tricks will work for all types of mammals being born on the farm. So just keep that in mind. If you're raising sheep or beef cows, a lot of these will work too. Hot water baths are great if you run into a situation where, you know, you were at work all day, come home, and there's this kid that looks like it's practically frozen that was born. This is usually the only thing that will bring them back. So when you do that, just make sure you're keeping their head out of the water. You do need to stay with them the entire time. And this can take anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes. So, but it works. We just recently had a goat that was born that I thought was dead when I saw it because it wasn't moving. It, you know, picked it up, realized that it still had a pulse, ran it into the house, put it in our bathtub, and it ended up being perfectly fine after that. In general, though, we don't want to intervene unless we absolutely have to. So the more that we intervene, the more that we're risking that mother's not going to bond with the baby and not take that baby under her care. There's also a greater chance that we're going to mess something up. So it's one of those things where if you have a good relationship with a vet, a good relationship with a neighbor farmer, you know, you can always say, oh, should I intervene? Should I not intervene? But measuring body temperature, and if you see any signs of that kid acting lethargic, you're not hearing it vocalize, you're not seeing it getting up and walking around and trying to nurse, that almost always with goats means that they got too cold and you need to get them under a heat lamp or under blow dryer, towel them off, or the hot water bath is the last resort. This is just a quick video of some goats under a heat lamp that we wanted to show you, so you can see that the mom. So in this situation, I did have to pull this goat pulled the goat. It was a cold day. So I said, well, let's just see what happens, turn the heat lamp on. And rather than me going right to town and drying her off and risking, that mom not taking that goat, I just stayed close by and watched, and didn't actually end up having to intervene any more than pulling that kid, turning the heat lamp on, and walking away. So I will play it one more time, but while it's playing, in the comments, if anybody has any idea for why I didn't intervene after watching this, go ahead and drop that in the comments. So, this was a cold day, but what are some of the things that we're seeing in this video that tell us mom and baby are doing okay and I can stay away? So yeah, both the mom and the kid were vocalizing. The mom's really attentive, so she's licking that kid off. She's not walking away and saying, I don't want to deal with this, it's too cold. The kid's moving. Same thing, baby's chatty, trying to stand in alert. So that is a good situation to show everything's okay here. I'm not going to walk away because it's cold, so I'm still going to hang out in my folding chair and keep an eye on you, but I'm not going to hop right in and intervene if they're doing okay. So the next thing that we're going to look at are some restraints, as well as tools that you could use to pull a kid if you needed to. In general, I try not to restrain the doe unless I absolutely have to, because I've got to intervene and I need to keep myself safe. The other time that you might restrain a doe is if the kid isn't nursing and you need to help that kid and you want to keep yourself safe. In general, the best thing to do is to stay hands off. So if you see a doe in labor, don't move her unless you absolutely have to. So I know some people, when that doe is in labor, you're going to move her to her own pen, and that's good, but it really needs to happen before she's in that second stage of labor. First stage of labor, it's okay to move her. But as soon as you see the water sac or some body parts, nose or feet sticking out, it's best to leave her if that's a safe situation for her to stay. Good restraint methods, we're going to show you what a rope halter looks like, but some other things to think about wherever you plan on having your goat's kid is, do you have a corner of a pen that you can use to help hold that animal in a safe space? Do you have extra people on hand to help you hold animals if you need to? And do you have access to protective and clean clothing that you can put on if you need to intervene at any time? So we'll go ahead and play this video.
So one thing that I like to keep in my kidding kit are some rope halters. These rope halters are a little bit thinner, so they're made for goats and sheep. And they can be really helpful for restraining the doe if you're working on trying to give her an exam, pull those kids out, or if she kidded and you're trying to get the kid to nurse, you can tie the doe up safely and have her standing in one spot while you try to help the kid nursing. The other thing that rope halters come in handy is that they can form very quick pulling cords if you need them. So you can create a loop in the cord, and if you're able to get a goat hoof, you can wrap it around the hoof and use that to help pull out the kid. If you are feeling adventurous, you can also use OB chains. These are made specifically for pulling out kids, lambs, goat, and calves. The way that you use OB chains, you'll see it's one long chain with a bigger loop at the end of it. You take the chain, loop it down through the big loop, and it creates a loop that you can put around the hoof. So what this looks like, if I'm doing a uterine exam to try to get the kid out, I find 2 hooves that I can pull on. I would take this chain, wrap it around one hoof, and pull gently, and it tugs on that hoof for me. What you'll find with kids, goats and kidding as you move along, is that typically just using your hands or even some small baler twine that you've cleaned up can be effective for pulling them out as well. Sometimes you'll need
So along the topic of pulling kids, what pulling kids means is that sometimes, a doe is in active labor, the labor isn't progressing, and she needs assistance with pulling that kid, getting that kid out. In general, we'll talk a little bit about OB exams in just a second, but in general with goats, because they are so small, you typically can pull them out just using your hands without any type of an intervention tool. Whereas with something larger like calves, oftentimes we're seeing, come-alongs or big OB chains or multiple people trying to tug. So in that way, goat kidding is a little bit easier to manage. Again, you can use a rope halter, small OB chains if you have them, twine if you need to. Just make sure whatever you are using is clean and sanitized, because you are putting that internally into the goat, and you want to make sure you're not introducing bacteria that could lead to an infection later on. Pulling kids sometimes is necessary to save both the mom and the kid. And the kind of time frame that we use is that if you are watching, you see a doe is straining to push for more than 20 or 30 minutes, then you should intervene. If everything's progressing, yeah, she's been pushing for 20 minutes, but you see 2 legs and then you see a head and things are coming out, things are moving along, you can take a step back and just let her do her own thing. But if for 20 or 30 minutes, there's been no change, then that's when you want to jump in there and see if something's stuck, something's not where it should be, and she might need a little bit of assistance. If you've been working on trying to pull a kid or any animal out for longer than 20 or 30 minutes, call for help. So at that point, that doe has been struggling for almost an hour. And after an hour of struggle, that means that, something might be really wrong. We might be getting into the dystocia situation that Amy introduced earlier. And this link right here gives you some helpful tools and timelines to think about for when to intervene and when not to intervene. Let me just go ahead for 1 second. So when we're thinking about why do we need to pull a kid, it's usually because the kid is not presenting like it should be. So typical presentation of a goat is 2 legs forward, head forward, or just the head forward and 2 legs back. Same thing for other types of mammals too. However, if we don't have that situation, if we have some of these other situations, that goat cannot get that kid out on her own. So we do need to intervene. So you can see here, this looks like there's only 1 leg coming out. If you only see 1 leg protruding, that's a good clue that you might need to intervene later on. If you don't see anything protruding and you do a uterine exam and you just feel a hump of flesh, that's usually because it's coming out rump first, and it's almost impossible for the doe to push that kid out that way. Sometimes we get floppy necks, so the head will be backwards or tucked under. So you've got 2 legs presenting, but no head coming out. Sometimes they can be upside down with one shoulder coming and the other shoulder kind of back. It's tough for the doe to get that out as well. The other situation that we run into with kids, especially depending on what types of strains of goats you have, they can have multiple kids per birth, and sometimes they can get all tangled up. So you might see 2 hooves coming out and think, oh, everything's great. But then we get to 20 minutes and nothing's progressing. You might do a uterine exam, go in there and realize that they are belonging to 2 different kids. So in that situation, you end up having to kind of push 1 kid back, pull the first kid out, go back in, grab that second kid. I do see a question, what's the probability of these births occurring that we need to intervene in? And I would say I don't have any hard and fast numbers, but it really does depend on the breed of goats and their genetic traits. So for example, I raise boar goats, so they've got really big shoulders, they're a little bit stockier, they're meat breeds. I do have to intervene more than when I've raised dairy goats in the past. Dairy goats are a little bit more frail, they're not as wide. And so it really just depends on the breeds. The other thing too is that some moms, depending on their body condition, depending on their body structure, they're going to have easier times to kid than others. So in the very first video that we talked about, Amy showed you 3 different does at 3 different stages of life. And so sometimes we can make the decision to delay breeding a doe based on her body composition. So if she's a little bit frail, she's still pretty narrow in her hips, she's still doing some growing, we might delay the breeding her to give her a little bit more time for her body to grow, for her hips, for her pelvic bones to continue to grow and expand. So she's got more room to try to get a kid out. The other thing to look at too is when you're selecting a buck to breed your animals to, what's his body composition? If he's already thrown some kids, was there any history of dystocia with any of those births? So sometimes if you have a buck that's got wide shoulders, he could produce kids that also have wide shoulders. So it really just depends on individual situations. Good question. So now we're going to go back and talk a little bit about uterine exams. So you've heard me kind of allude to it. We're going to show you what types of supplies to keep on hand and what that process looks like.
Before we jump into that, Caitlin, we do have another question in the chat. So how much are delivery challenges based on genetics versus environment? So if you're improving a herd, does it make sense to intervene actively in births?
Yeah, I don't have any research, and Amy, I'm not sure if you do, that would kind of say like this is what the actual proportion is. I think it just depends on situation. The other thing too is, you know, if you're raising goats commercially and you have 200 goats, you're going to be less likely to intervene because you just don't have the time and money and effort to do that. Versus if you have only a few goats, you know, it's not a big deal for you to intervene. So you could essentially end up in a situation where you might be selecting for larger kids over time because you're keeping those kids alive by intervening. Go ahead, Amy, I saw you.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so I wouldn't just leave the does to their own devices. So if they're struggling to give birth, please help them because it becomes a welfare issue. So always help does that are having problems. But if you don't want that doe in your herd in the future, so that we don't encounter situations like Caitlin had mentioned, where you're, accidentally breeding for these animals that are having a hard time giving birth, you can sell that doe after she's weaned that kid, but always intervene in births if you have to.
Yep, and even in commercial situations too, like they're still intervening. It's just that their sensitivity to it might be a little bit lower or a little bit higher. So it's, again, just echoing Amy, like we can't not intervene because we're trying to breed for does that we don't want to intervene, because we will lose both the doe and any of the kids that are in there if we don't intervene after that 20 to 30 minutes of struggle. Okay, so now we're going to look at supplies and the process for an OB exam.
Sometimes you'll need to perform a uterine exam on a doe as she's kidding. You might need to do this if you're noticing that she's not progressing through labor. You might need to do this if you're only seeing one hoof come out and not two. Also, sometimes if you are suspecting that that doe has more than one kid and you've only seen one kid come out and it's been quite a while before the next kid has made its appearance, you might need to do a uterine exam. So in order to do a uterine exam, the best thing I can tell you is to not be afraid of the vagina, and that is heartfelt advice. And the thing is you have to be gentle, you have to go slow, but she's already so dilated, you're not going to hurt her. The best thing you can do is make sure that you have lubricant, make sure that the gloves that you're using are clean. You want to remove any rings or jewelry that you have, make sure your nails are filed down, and again, don't be afraid of the vagina. So what you would need to perform an intrauterine exam would be an OB glove. These are arm-length gloves, typically made for cattle work, but come really in handy for goat work too. So the other thing that I like to use is just a regular exam glove. Sometimes all you need is just an exam glove. So it might be that the two goat feet are right there, right past the cervix, but maybe the shoulders are caught. So you might just need an exam glove to get in there and tug on those 2 front feet. And then, most importantly, while we're not being afraid of the vagina, is a whole gallon bucket of lube. So this is really important to make sure that our hands are lubricated. So when we're doing that inner uterine exam, it just makes everything not hurt as much for the mom, and everything goes a lot smoother. The other thing that you can do too is if you know that maybe she's kidding and the shoulders are a little bit wider and she's just struggling to push them out, you can actually put an exam glove on, put a golf ball size of lube in your hand and help lubricate her vagina and into her cervix, and that will actually help her push that kid out on her own. So the way that I like to do this, I like to use my non-dominant hand so that your non-dominant hand is a little bit less strong, and you're going to be a little bit more gentler naturally because it's not your dominant hand, and it keeps my dominant hand free for whatever else I need to do. Put my OB glove on. Again, this is to protect my arm, and it also protects the dough from any types of bacteria that might be on my hand. Then what I like to do, just to helps with what I'm feeling when I'm in there, is I actually put an exam glove over it, and you'll see it decreases the bulk that's on my OB glove. Then you're really going to put a golf ball size of lube on your hand. I know it seems like a lot, but that's what you need. So what I would do is rub this all around my gloved hand, and then I would go into the vagina and use the lube to lube up her vagina, lube up her cervix, and get in there and see what's going on. You don't have to go very far. So goats are very small animals. Usually it's just past my wrist and I'm into her uterus and I can see what's going on.
Okay, so some other things to just kind of reiterate when it comes to intrauterine exams: use all of the lubricating jelly that you possibly can. I know I've heard sometimes of people using like dish soap and other things like that, but those can actually be really irritating to the uterine lining. So we absolutely recommend just a basic lubricating jelly. You can buy a gallon of it for not that much money. Just keep it on hand. And for those of you who might have grown up around animals, sometimes children, human kids, actually end up being the ones that are trying to pull animals. So goat birth canals are very small, and it sometimes can be difficult to navigate depending on the size of your hands. So if you know of somebody that might have more petite sized hands, that can be helpful to have as well. We have a poll question that's meant to be a little bit funny. We will go ahead and put that up here. This is what we call our vagina question. So just to get kind of a sense on how people feel about intrauterine exams, let us know if you are afraid of the goat vagina. So not at all. Yes, absolutely freaks me out. They're weird, but it's part of the package. And wait, what? I didn't sign up for this. So we'll leave this up here for a little bit. And also too, we will move on, but I know sometimes intrauterine exams are what I get the most questions about. So if you have any other questions about that, go ahead and drop those in the chat. We can circle back to those. Go ahead and end this poll and share the results. Looks like we're across the board, but we haven't completely freaked anybody out 100%, Amy. So we're doing good. So I jokingly tell all of my beginning farmers not to be afraid of the vagina, and as long as you are going slow and you're using clean, disinfected equipment and a quality lubricating jelly, you're not going to hurt them. Okay, so next, we do have a great question actually. What if they already have part of the bag out? Is there a concern for pushing that back in? So I guess are you talking about like a water sac? Yes, okay. So typically when you're doing an intrauterine exam, you will not do that until the water sac has already come out and has ruptured. At that point, once the water sac has ruptured, their placenta is now open. So you're not going to introduce anything else as long as everything that you're using is clean and sanitized. You're also not going to push that back in because it's already been ruptured and the animal's coming out. If you run into a situation where, you show up and you're not sure if that water bag has ruptured or not, but you are sure that she's been in active labor for more than that 20 or 30 minutes, you can go ahead and perform an intrauterine exam. I would just go a little bit slower and kind of go by feel, or call your vet for some extra advice there. But even in that situation, as long as you know that she's in active labor and she's been in active labor for a while, if you accidentally rupture her membranes, rupture that water bag, she's already in active labor, so that isn't going to hurt her. We just want to make sure that we're not going past that 20 or 30 minutes of straining, because at that point, our risks of having stillbirth for the kids goes up immensely. So that's why we really want to focus on getting right in there and helping as soon as we can. And let me know if that didn't answer your question. So the next thing that we're going to look at is navel care and supplies to have on hand for that.
So as the kid comes out, it will still have an umbilical cord that's attached to this placenta. That placenta has provided that kid with nutrients while it's been in the womb, and it does need to come detached. Most of the time, the umbilical cord will detach on its own, which makes it really easy for us to manage. If it hasn't detached on its own, you can use waxed, unflavored, unscented dental floss to essentially tie off the umbilical cord, or you can use forceps to stop the blood flow through that umbilical cord. And then you can use surgical scissors or a sterile scalpel to sever that umbilical cord from the placenta. In either case, whether you've had to manually separate that umbilical cord or if it's detached on its own, it is recommended that you use an iodine solution to sanitize and disinfect that navel cord. That will help prevent navel infections, which can be really deadly for newborn kids. So what I like to do is work with my veterinarian to pick out an iodine solution that fits our farm best. And I'll actually pour just a little bit of the solution about halfway up a disposable cup. The advantage of using a disposable cup is that then I can check it when I'm all done. So fill this up about halfway, 2/3 of the way with that iodine solution, and you actually dip that navel in there. Make sure you're covering all the way up to the skin and remove it. Discard everything that's left. That helps disinfect the navel and get that kid off to the right start. Sometimes, unfortunately,
So I do see that we have a question. So Katelyn, in which situations would you need to cut the cord yourself?
This is a great question. So I, in all of my years of raising goats, have never had to cut a cord myself. However, the situation can arise where that cord doesn't detach on its own. And I think a lot of us grow up watching movies of the dad gets to cut the cord during the human birth, right? So we think that that's what we have to do for all births. But for the most part, livestock animals, when they're being born, their umbilical cords are a little bit thinner and they detach on their own through the birthing process. So rarely will you have to cut an umbilical cord. When you need to do it is if you notice that the umbilical cord is still attached to the placenta after the kid has been born. In that case, you'd want to tie it off. The other thing that can sometimes happen that I've seen is the umbilical cord detaches quite a bit longer than it should. So what we want is a between 1 and 2 inches long umbilical cord left on that kid. If it's longer than that, then you might want to consider trimming that and cutting off the excess. The reason that we want to do that is the umbilical cord is an open wound at that point. So if it's longer, it could drag on whatever types of bedding you have and pick up bacteria and cause an infection. The other thing that I didn't mention in the video is that you don't have to use a dip solution to sanitize the navel. You can also use a spray bottle. So the iodine that we were showing came with a sprayer, and you can spray the iodine onto the navel. The biggest thing is that you want to completely saturate that, saturate the navel. So it's not as simple as just spraying it once or twice. It has to be completely saturated. The next thing that we're going to talk about is supplemental feeding and options for doing that.
Sometimes, unfortunately, does won't nurse their kids well, and we have to intervene. Some things that you should look out for is use your handy dandy sitting chair and hang out for a little bit. If after a couple of hours you haven't noticed that that kid has gotten up, nursed, latched on really well, you might need to intervene. This can involve using the rope halter to tie that doe up and assisting the kid with getting attached to the udder. And if that doesn't work, we have to do some other things. So the first thing that we might need to consider doing is actually hand milking the goat. So we would use something that's food safe. So I've got like a stainless steel pail here that I use, and hand milk that goat into the pail. You can also hand milk a goat directly into a bottle depending on how docile and calm she is. After we've hand milked the goat, we can then use a bottle and a nipple to hand feed the kid. So what I've got here is just a plastic lamb and kid bottle and a nipple. The cool part about this nipple is that it will actually screw on to just a regular water bottle or a soda bottle. So it makes it really easy to use those, and then you can just chuck them instead of having to try to clean anything out. If for some reason you're not able to actually milk that doe, or if she's not producing milk, you might have to use some type of a replacer. So the first thing is that the kid needs to have colostrum. Colostrum is that very first milk that a doe gives after kidding, and it's full of immunoglobulins, high fat content, and really helps to get the kid off to a good start. What I have here is lamb and kid colostrum replacer. That replacer is super important. So on the market, there are colostrum supplements, and if you're only feeding a supplement, the animal will not be getting everything that it needs to get off to a good start. So what we want to look for is colostrum replacer. Follow the labor instructions. It'll have you mix accordingly into warm water. We'll put it in the bottle, and we'll use that to feed the kid. If after that first feeding, you're still not having any success with getting the kid to latch on the doe, you'll have to use a milk replacer. This is a goat-specific milk replacer. You can buy all species milk replacer, but the issue with all species milk replacer is that it's meant to be an average for everybody, so it's useless for everybody. So I definitely recommend getting species-specific milk replacer. On this milk replacer bag, on all milk replacer bags, you'll find mixing instructions and feeding rates based on the age of the kids, so follow those accordingly. If you get in a bind and you can't get to colostrum or milk replacer, a last resort would be to use whole milk that you might have in your fridge, warm it up, and you could feed that to your kid, the kid in the meantime. Sometimes even after feeding colostrum, feeding milk or milk replacer, goats might still look like, kids might look like they're still dehydrated, does might look like they're still dehydrated after kidding. So it's helpful to keep goat electrolyte on hand. This is just like Gatorade for humans. It's balanced to support hydration and help that animal get hydrated quickly. It also provides like an immediate source of energy. So sometimes for kids that are a little bit lethargic, that essential sugar rush can help get them up and running so that they'll try to nurse off of the mom. You'll mix this according to package directions. Use our handy dandy bottle to feed it to the animal. And you'll see on this nipple, it's actually closed. So what you can do is you can cut off the end of it to the size that you need. For kids that have been just born, we're just going to barely cut the edge of this. So newborn kids don't actually need a lot of liquid volume, and they eat very slow. So if we cut this too close to the base of the nipple, it would come out too fast. So electrolytes can be really helpful to have on hand for both the mom and the kid.
Okay, so in general, we don't want to intervene here unless we need to again. So we want to give that kid some time to get up and try to nurse on her own. If after half an hour, the kid hasn't been successful with nursing, you might want to consider restraining the doe and trying to manually help the kid nurse. So you might have to pick the kid up, bring the kid to the doe's udder, pre-strip a couple of strips of milk out, and then try to get the kid to latch to the doe. If that's not working either, then we can switch to bottle feeding the kid. Sometimes what happens too is that, the kid might be nursing, but we might think that we need to give her a little bit extra milk. So we might supplement with some milk replacer. If that kid is nursing, is verbal, is up and running around, isn't lethargic or skinny or dehydrated, it's recommended to not supplement with milk replacer. So what can actually happen if you are supplementing with milk replacer and the doe and the kid are still together? The kid's less hungry and doesn't nurse as often on the doe. So you can actually cause that doe to underproduce. So it's not great to do a little bit of both. Don't, leave the kid in there and expect the kid to nurse a little bit and supplement. So either completely supplement the kid or encourage the kid to completely nurse if that situation is working okay, where the kid is nursing off of the doe. And we also want to supply clean water all the time to both the mom and the kid, especially right after birth. Sometimes, if I've got the time to do it, I'll bring the mom just a pail of some lukewarm, fresh water, and they will drink it right down because that's exhausting. And they are now trying to produce milk for a baby, so they need even more water. You can give free choice grain to the kid about a month after birth. You want to do it in a system where the mom can't have access to it. So a creep feeder is what it's called. So only the kid can get to that grain and the mom cannot. But that's not anything that you have to worry about right at birth. So right at birth, the kid can get everything that they need from the milk of the mother, as long as the mom is producing. So the next video, we're not actually going to show, it talks a little bit about some pharmaceutical products to have on hand that include antibiotics, calcium, dextrose, and a few other things. The important thing to note is that with any type of pharmaceutical intervention, that might be an IV, it might be some other type of an injection, work with your veterinarian. So unfortunately, we don't have a ton of medical products that are actually labeled for goat use. So you have to work with your veterinarian because they're considered off-label, which means you're not following the directions because it's not specifically labeled for use in goats. The other thing that you might want to consider doing is giving vaccinations right at birth or prior to birth for the doe, depending on your farm. And again, this vaccination schedule, work with your vet to do it. The reason that we sometimes recommend giving vaccinations right at birth is that you're already handling that kid potentially. So it just reduces another time that you have to go out and handle the kid. And yes, so the main vaccination that we're giving goats is C, D, and T. So it will cover tetanus, which is a concern when we're talking about banding goats or ear tagging them, whenever we're introducing some type of bacteria. Depending on your veterinarian's recommendation, you might also give that CDT shot to the mom a couple weeks before you're expecting her to give birth. And then that way there will be immunity right in that. Oh, yep. Heidi's one step ahead of me. So you might actually give some vaccinations to the doe before birth, so that then the immunity for those vaccinations is in her colostrum, so that the kid can get passive immunity either intrauterine or via milk once the kid is born. So at this point, we're going to turn it over for questions. We do have a couple of poll questions that I'm going to pop up here while I'm talking. So the first question, we will have a pop-up survey that shows up after you exit the webinar, and we want to know whether you'll fill it out. And you'll notice that our answers might lean a little bit towards, we really hope you fill that out and provide us with some feedback. So your options are yes, yelp for sure, yes, and probably. While everybody is filling that out, we do want to give a shameless plug that in 2 weeks, we have another goat focused seminar on goat, herd, and foot health. We're going to talk a little bit about common herd health diseases that we see in goats and ways to manage them. And we're going to show some really extensive videos on hoof trimming. So how to hoof trim, supplies to have on hand, and issues that you might run into there. So we'll show these poll questions, and then we'll go back to our questions in our chat box. So good news is you guys are going to fill out the survey. We really appreciate that. We have opportunities to continue to offer these seminars. So there's a part where you can actually go ahead and let us know about other topics. There is a question, can you put the survey link in the chat? I can't, but maybe Amy can find it. But regardless, as soon as you exit out of Zoom, it'll actually automatically pop up for you, so you won't have to go find it. The other kind of housekeeping thing before we go back to questions is we will be sharing the recording out with all of you, as well as the slides and the links to the playlist for all of these videos on our YouTube channel. So you'll have access to that. We have one other kind of poll question just to see how folks felt about the content right now. We'd like to know if you learned anything new. We'd like to know if you are still interested in breeding goats, and we'd like to know if you need to learn some more information about any other reproduction and kidding related topics. So we'll leave this up here for a second. Oh, thank you, Amy. So Amy found the survey link. So you can click on that and open up the survey right now if you want to. I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. This is mostly just for Amy and I to track and see how we're doing. Looks like everybody learned something new, which is really great. We haven't had anybody completely drop out of breeding goats, but a couple maybes, and that's okay. It can be a daunting thing. And some people that are interested in learning more about breeding systems and other things as well. Okay, so now we will hop on over to the chat box and look at the questions that were coming in there. Oh, yep. So we had somebody share, we were successful in having a Nubian with one kid provide milk for another kid. So we tied her and put the kid on the Nubian. That's great. So if you have, and sometimes you run into does that aren't great moms. And if you aren't interested in having a bottle baby, which is a lot of work, you can sometimes find other does that have recently kidded that will adopt those. And the best way to do that is to kind of force it, right? So you put that doe in a small area with the kid that you're trying to get her to adopt, and keep a really close eye. So sometimes those does can be really aggressive to new kids, but other times you get does that are just exceptional moms and will take all the babies and produce enough milk to care for them. The other thing too is if you have a lactating doe, lactation is responsive. So if you have a lactating doe and add another kid, that doe's biology is going to say, oh, there's another kid here that's trying to eat more milk. I need to produce more milk. So for the most part, you can have does that will produce milk increasingly to meet the needs that they're finding.
Yep, and it looks like Heidi has given us some other things that we could learn more about. So illness and disease that could occur after birth with the kids, maybe metabolic disorders, things of that nature, malnutrition, lack of vitamins. Yeah, so there's a lot that can go wrong with kidding. And so maybe we could have a lecture more on dystocias and problems that you can have, because as we all know, it's not all sunshine and roses, though we'd love it to be. So thank you for those suggestions.
We tried not to scare you right off the back. So focus on some good things here too. But definitely there's that 5-minute video about pharmaceutical interventions and things to keep on hand. We give a little bit of a preview of some of these illnesses and diseases that can happen for both the kids and the dam, and medicines and treatments that you can keep on hand to help address those if needed. So with that, if anybody else has, I know we're over our time by a few minutes, but if anybody else has any questions or comments, feel free to drop those in the chat. Otherwise, we will go ahead and end the webinar. We hope to see you in 2 weeks. If you have any questions about this topic that you'd like to ask individually, please feel free to email Amy or I, and we can provide you with those resources. And we hope you guys all have a great night. Amy, anything else to add?
Nope, I think we covered a lot of information tonight. Take time and digest it. And as Katelyn said, reach out to us with any questions. So thank you all so much. Good night.